Florida's Fourth Estate with hosts Ginger Gadsden and Matt Austin. The show where we bring Florida into focus. Sponsored by Light Orlando, delivering hope together.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another fantastic edition of Florida's Fourth Estate. And this time, I really mean it. I say it every single time. But
she's usually lying.
This one is a deep love burning in my soul. I was so excited when I found out we were going to have a guest on to talk about movies that have been made in Florida, the history of films being made in Florida, and there are some films that have been made in Florida even I didn't know about, but I love these movies in particular. So I'm super excited to dive headfirst into this topic
She is
today.
pretty jacked about this. I'm excited too, but you're going to notice that when we talk about some of the big films made in Florida, they're from a really long time ago. We've had some shows here and there, but the industry is maybe not catered to as much in our state as it is in other states, and that's why we're not getting these big Hollywood blockbusters.
We got to change that.
Well, we're about to talk about that, and we have like the perfect guy to talk about this whole scenario. He's a PhD. He's a professor at UCF. His name is David Morton. And he teaches some interesting classes there. David, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Oh my gosh, it is a pleasure to have you here because when you talk about the history of movies, Florida has really played a big role from the beginning, but then all of a sudden we kind of fell off the map on that. Can you give us a little, just a Cliff's Notes version of how we got to be so good at making movies back when it was black and white and not even talkies to where we are right now?
Yeah. So, I mean, the story of the Florida film industry is really one of a rise and a fall and a rise and fall again. And hopefully we're going to see another rise very soon.
Yeah, that's what we're working on, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The history of the film industry in Florida is almost as old as the motion picture itself. So we could go all the way back to 1898. When a cameraman named William Paley came down under orders of Thomas Edison and William Randolph Hearst, same inspiration for Orson Welles' Citizen Kane, to get some of the first moving images of troops who were embarking to go fight in Cuba. So footage of Theodore Roosevelt and the Rough Riders leaving from Tampa, the announcement of the Spanish-American War. This is really the first time that many people in the United States even seen Florida on film. And then over the next 10 years, the Edison Motion Picture Company ended up becoming very closely tied to Florida. In 1908, a company called Colem, led by a female director and writer by the name of Jean Gontier, arrived in December of 1908. They filmed almost 20 movies.
Oh my gosh.
Right? I mean, most of them are about 7-8 minutes long.
And she was definitely ahead of her time for being a woman in 1908 and doing what she was doing.
Very progressive. And the stories themselves were fascinating. Many of them were Civil War dramas. Many of them involved her playing based on a real Confederate spy by the name of Belle Boyd, who would often disguise herself as a Union soldier and then infiltrate behind enemy lines. And as far as I've seen from my research in film history, this is the first time that landscape and outdoor filmmaking was very robustly used by a motion picture studio. And
so were they just movie sets, I guess?
I'm trying to picture the equipment.
Yeah.
In 1928?
1908, right?
It was 1908, yeah.
1908.
1908.
I threw a 2 in there. My brain was like, couldn't be 1908. So in 1908, just give me a picture of what the equipment would look like as they're schlepping through the Florida swamp.
Are they doing this?
The hand crank and everything. Absolutely, yeah. They got the hand crank. And actually, that's one of the reasons why so many filmmakers were interested in coming to Florida, especially in the wintertime, because the film would get jammed up in the camera. So if you're filming in New York, you're filming in Chicago, Philadelphia, and temperatures, exactly, and you would get static on the film reels that would end up also making the film almost unwatchable and unreadable. So coming down in November, December, January, this was the perfect time of year to be doing these shoots in Florida. So Edison and company, over the next 5-6 years, they built up this major film colony with Jacksonville as its center, but they're going down to Tampa Bay. There was efforts to make studios down in Miami. St. Augustine was a very popular stand-in. And really up until about 1914, 1915, Jacksonville outproduced the small California orange grove town called Hollywood by almost 2-1.
That's crazy. Jacksonville,
Florida.
Okay, so what was the decision? What was the turning point that kept Florida from being the next California?
Yeah, so in 1917, there was a mayor's race that was basically a referendum on the motion picture industry in Jacksonville. There were claims that these bohemian movie people were coming in and being too disruptive when they were shooting. They would have to shut down traffic. They would have to, sometimes people would yell fire just to get a crowd out on the street. So there were
like really not funny. Were yelling fire,
and they would just scream fire, and it
was a little reckless. I'm gonna say that was a little reckless. Yeah,
and there's some great footage. There's like a man in an oversized baby carriage, dressed as a baby, just running down the street of Jacksonville in like 1916, and
the original Florida man.
The original Florida man, absolutely. Actually, I'll digress for a second. That was one of the first movies the Columbia Studios did was The Cracker's Bride. Or called Love in the Everglades, and they got so much slack for
was this a dirty movie?
Oh, well, we have plenty of those, too, we could talk about, too.
It's a family show. We can't talk about those.
Oh, no, we can't.
That's I loved just the history of all of that, but we could talk to you for hours, but we only have a limited time. Like, we got a list from you of like 10 movies that you have some knowledge of and what went on behind the scenes. And we talked about it. I was going to pick the ones that I was really interested in to ask you about, if that's okay.
That sounds great.
Creature from the Black Lagoon. Let's go.
One of my all-time favorites. So director Jack Arnold, he actually first came up with the idea from Orson Welles, nonetheless. Orson Welles had gone down right after Citizen Kane to shoot in Brazil, and they had heard the story from these indigenous peoples in Brazil about this swamp monster that would kidnap a woman and take her as his bride. And lo and behold, Universal Studios in the 1940s was struggling. The Universal horror of the 30s with Dracula, Frankenstein, The Invisible Man, it's not what it used to be.
Yeah.
So this is very widely credited to be the film that saved Universal Studios. The majority of the interiors were shot in Burbank, in California, but all the outdoor location scenes were shot at Wakulla and Silver Springs. Actually, it was a Ocala swim coach by the name of Newton Perry who played location scout and also recommended that one of his proteges, a lifeguard at Silver Springs named Rico Browning, be the underwater gill man. In fact, Browning was the one who picked up Arnold and ended up giving him a tour of the grounds. And they're like, hey, we like the way you swim. Do you want to be the creature from the Black Lagoon?
And let me think about that.
Wow.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, he was like, I don't know what that is, but sure.
Do I get to swim?
Yeah, because Florida also became like an industry for underwater films, too. Was it
Absolutely.
because of that?
So a lot of it actually had to do with Newton Perry and what was being done at Silver Springs. So we could go back to 1929 with a very short sports documentary called Crystal Champions, starring a Olympic diver named Johnny Weissmuller. So the very same Johnny Weissmuller who later became Tarzan the Ape Man.
Yes.
And they were doing all kinds of experiments with underwater filmmaking at Silver Springs because of how crystal clear the water was there. So, yeah.
Okay,
That's
because you
amazing.
need crystal clear water to make that movie. Okay, so just a couple more
It's
questions.
my turn.
No, we're not finished yet. Creature from the Black Lagoon. Was it done in 3D originally? Right?
It was intended to, yes. And it was all part of this like new phenomenon to get people back into theaters. By this point, the film industry is competing with television. Older audiences are staying home, and you need these gimmicks to bring in young audiences. So 3D filmmaking was also being worked on, especially for the sequels.
Oh, my God. Okay, one more question.
Go ahead. I know you're not going to let me jump in.
So I read somewhere that the guy who did it, he was, I don't know if he was nominated for an Academy Award, but then he got a certificate and it had the Oscar statue kind of on it. And that's what the creature was modeled after. Because he's like, this would look good with some gills on it. And now I can't unsee it. Is that true?
So there are all kinds of apocryphal stories around the inspiration for the design, but yes, that is one of the more famous stories. Is that the Oscar statuette was the initial template? I'll throw one more funny story in.
Okay.
So Rico Browning had a very hard time getting in and out of the suit, and also there was no visibility. And there were a couple of times where he had to go out to relieve himself, and he ended up swimming on shore with a bunch of unknowing springgoers.
Oh boy!
And you could just imagine
They got a show.
reaction.
They got a show, another show.
So he is in full costume.
Full costume.
And he swims onto shore, and people randomly are seeing this.
And nobody's seen the movie yet, so they don't know what this is.
They don't know what's
You can just
happening. I've
imagine.
never seen
Is
anything
that a
like
skunk
this
ape?
before.
What is it?
Yeah.
It's another Sunday
And
in
then all of a
Florida.
sudden, it's peeing right in front of you. That would be extra
Oh
weird.
my gosh,
All right, I hate to move on.
Sure. Don't.
We could talk about Creature from the Black Lagoon
All day.
for hours,
Don't hate.
but we like to make fun of each other. I want to talk about Flipper, because that's another, I mean, clearly water movies are a theme here in Florida. It makes a lot of sense. That was a huge movie. How did it all go down?
Yeah, so actually, the Creature from Black Lagoon has a tie-in to this, too. Rico Browning was the person who came up with the idea for Flipper originally. He was very interested in Greek mythology, and he was fascinated by dolphins. And he, after his career as the Gillman in Creature from the Black Lagoon, ended up teaming up with a Hungarian-born former OSS agent who was also partially the inspiration for James Bond. This guy was named Ivan Tors. He ended up founding first a studio in Nassau in the Bahamas, and later he built a studio that today is Greenwich Studio in Miami. And Ivan Tors was very interested in doing children's programming with animals. So he worked very closely with Tors as a underwater stunt double when they were producing shows like Sea Hunt. And he ends up pitching the idea to Tors, and Tors goes, well, forget about a book, which was the initial plan. Let's make a movie. So they end up pitching the idea, and at the same time as they're shooting the movie, they're preparing a pilot for NBC. So the film comes out, and then you have the hit TV show right afterward.
Wow. Just like that. Flipper.
I love Flipper is what, it's an emotional story. It's a boy who just, falls in love with this dolphin, and their relationship is just so precious and so sweet. I love that. Okay, so do you have any more Flipper questions?
You see how I did that?
No.
I let him explain Flipper.
Yeah, okay.
And then we move on back to your 16 questions. What's the next one for you?
Great. This one is going to be a favorite of so many people because they can quote lines from it. They can't even remember their own anniversary. Caddyshack.
Oh, yes.
Cinderella story. Coming on the 17th hole.
Oh, boy. Okay. Tell us a little bit about that one because it is beloved.
Oh, yes. So how kid-friendly is this?
You don't have to worry about being kid-friendly.
Yeah.
Okay.
So drugs.
You'll get different answers from both of us.
Oh, sure.
But go with my answer. So what were you saying? A drug?
Yeah, so drugs actually had a lot to do with why Caddyshack was filmed right here in Florida.
What?
Oh, yeah. So the original plan was to shoot at a country club resort somewhere in Iowa, Wisconsin, or in the Midwest. And the problem was that they were afraid, Harold Ramis and the National Lampoon crowd, they were afraid of getting busted in like Illinois or Iowa. And so they needed to get as close to the supply of cocaine as possible. And this is about the same time that we're in the...
Where
It's one of our
find
perks.
bricks of cocaine washing up on shore?
You just like pick it up and go right to Davie and then shoot in the country club right there.
So wait, what was the culture around cocaine back then? Did they feel like they needed it to work, or they just wanted to have it to party?
That was the National Lampoon's crowd right there. I think 90% of Animal House, Caddyshack.
Yeah, for sure.
Any of the Ramis or Doug Kenny films had at least some kind of inhibiting substances that were influencing some of the ideas.
While they were shooting, too.
While they were shooting. And I remember going through in my research interview with Chevy Chase, like talking about stories of them jousting with their golf carts and just talking about how depraved everything was on set.
So you talked to Chevy Chase?
I did not personally, but I did find a really funny interview in Sports Illustrated about it.
Okay, because I've heard he's terrible to work.
Very cantankerous.
Yes.
So that's why that as well.
Yeah. Oh my goodness! Who would have thought like a movie fueled by drugs could be this icon, this classic cinema piece of cinema that people quote almost on the daily. That I wasn't prepared for that backstory,
Sure.
but that's interesting.
And Rodney Dangerfield, that was one of his big breakouts.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
he was
Mr.
the king
No
of
Respect.
great one-liners right
Yeah,
there.
for real.
All
For real.
thanks to that sweet, sweet nose candy. All right.
Oh my gosh.
We got that to come. Okay, so I want to skip ahead to one of the newer ones because we don't have a lot of new ones. There are some shows that we see shot here, but the Florida Project was kind of a big deal, more of a documentary style.
Yeah, I would definitely say very cinema verite and very much like a guerrilla style filmmaking that was being done. This is really, I think, one of the very few films to show how the other half lives, especially along that 1792 intersection.
And right in the shadow of Disney, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Disney was not thrilled to have this type of story told. In fact, again, there was no permission given for Sean Baker to shoot on location. And he's coming fresh off of another movie called Tangerine that was very gonzo style and very, off the cusp in the way things were being shot. So I feel like that film really managed to manifest that, plus also capturing all these different pastels and colors and shades.
Yeah.
I really would say it is one of my top films of the 21st century, both in terms of style, social messaging, and it really captures the ambiance of space. But again, Osceola County was not a big fan of.
Of course not.
Did Disney actively try to shut it down? Did you hear anything about that?
So, I mean, I'm sure there were some behind the scenes efforts. There's nothing I could necessarily verify being done, but you
could
could
imagine some letters were sent.
letters and a lot of gritted teeth, definitely for sure.
Of course, because for a lot of people, you just think of this magical world surrounding that area, and then you see these families barely surviving and living out of hotels, and just, the lifestyle, it just doesn't go with the aesthetics of what you think it is.
Absolutely. And again, it's that contrast.
Yeah.
And, again, that's that manufactured image of Florida versus the reality. And that's been a tension of the entire story of Florida film. I would say going all the way back to those filmmakers in 1908 who were shooting on location.
Yeah.
There is an image that the community wanted to project about itself. And then there's the reality. And film, it works both ways.
Yeah.
So clearly there aren't a lot of. Did you have another one you wanted to ask about?
I did.
Okay.
I did, but go on.
No, please.
No,
Because I was going to move ahead. But
I want to ask about, because it won the Academy Award, Moonlight.
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
Oh, that's a good one,
It almost didn't, and then it did, because it was the year they had the debacle where the wrong name was read for the winning motion picture, and every person who was involved with Moonlight didn't get their moment in the spotlight because it was an all-black cast, right? Mm-hmm. And so here they are, and they're cheering for this. I can't even remember what the other movie was. Do you remember?
Oh, yeah. So that was La La Land that was up against it, right?
Oh, my gosh. So everybody's like cheering, and it's like, and they have to come back and they're like, La La Land, we're sorry, but it's really, and so the moment is gone, really, but this movie was beautifully done. It put Black people on the screen in a way that I had not seen ourselves represented ever, actually. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. And if you don't mind, I'll give a short history lesson, too, about Black images on the screen in Florida.
Yeah.
It's very interesting because 80 years before Moonlight, you had a film called The Flying Ace that was produced in Jacksonville by a white director named Richard Norman, and it had a all-black cast. It featured heroic Black characters. Again, the title even, Flying Ace, it was basically the lead character was part Sherlock Holmes, part World War I veteran and detective. And it's a masterpiece. It actually, in 2021, was selected by the Library of Congress to be preserved as culturally and historically significant. Mm-hmm. And there was an entire studio in Jacksonville in the 1920s dedicated to what they called race films and telling exclusively Black stories in a way that was very separate from the quite racist stereotypes.
Stereotypical, yes.
So I think it was very fitting that exactly 80 years after The Flying Ace comes out, 90 years. So 90 years after The Flying Ace comes out, you have Moonlight sweeping through the Oscars. Barry Jenkins, FSU grad, somebody with very real, Florida credentials. Again, very similar to Sean Baker, capturing a lot of the vibrant colors and pastels and images of what Liberty City looks like, and especially like in the aftermath of that very tumultuous period in the 1980s and the rebuilding efforts in the 1990s. these are filmmakers who I think really had such a profound sense of place, identity, the wide variety of different images about Florida, stories that could be told beyond just a Florida man, or the very stereotypical fun in the sun beach images that we have of the state. There's some very real human stories, and Barry Jenkins, they got stolen. I feel like when it came to that.
Yeah.
Listen, oh my God, yeah, it broke my heart, but it was such a beautifully done film. And for someone, I've seen a lot of the old movies made with African Americans, and the makeup wasn't right, the hair was a disgrace, like everything. But this was, it was just a different light, and it really just honored like everyone involved with it. So
absolutely
loved it.
So go back to The Flying Ace. You said there was a white director who did this. Why did he do? Because back in 1926, when that movie came out, that seems very early for somebody to make a decision like that. What was the meaning behind it?
Oh, absolutely. I think a lot of it was financial, but I think he also was definitely progressive.
Was he trying to market to Black audiences?
Exclusively so. So basically, Richard Norman was initially a itinerant filmmaker where he was kind of like the Music Man. He spent a lot of time in the Midwest. So he would go to these like small towns, and he had a film that he had pre-shot called The Wrecker, about 60 minutes of footage with a cast and crew. And then he would show up in this town like in Iowa and go to the mayor and say, hey, do you want me to shoot my movie here? And he would do 1 or 2 scenes with the mayor, a couple establishing shots of the town, recut it into his movie, and then show it for a big profit. He was initially from Middleburg, Florida, right outside of Jacksonville. And sometime around 1919, he returns home. And this is about the same time that there's something known as the Chitlin Circuit. So like we have at this time this very vibrant jazz and blues scene appearing in Jacksonville's Ashley Street. And he's watching as these moviegoers and theatergoers are very excited and enthusiastic. So he decides to recut that same film, this time with an all-black cast. So he renames it The Green-Eyed Monster, shows it at Frank Crowd's Strand Theater in Ashley Street in Jacksonville, and it sells out. He makes more money with the showing of that than any other film.
Wow.
So he starts reaching out to other very high-profile Black filmmakers like Oscar Micheaux and the Lincoln Motion Picture Company. And his goal, his vision was actually to build a version of Black Hollywood right in Jacksonville.
Did you know this?
No.
I'm learning so much.
My eyes are welling with tears hearing this. I mean, because it's just, I just had no idea. So I'm so glad to discover this, and I can't wait. Like, I love what we're doing right now, but I want to dive into, like, read more about, especially the history of that in particular.
Oh, I have so much to say about it, too.
I know.
So why didn't it become the Black Hollywood that he was projecting?
Yeah, so the tragedy there was it wasn't even political. It was technological. So by the time that his films were really hitting stride, his biggest hit was a film called Black Gold, which for the most part is now lost. We have fragments of the film.
We can't even watch the whole thing.
Can't even watch the whole thing. And, but that was like his biggest hit, too. That's the great tragedy. And that came out in 1928. A year earlier, a little movie called The Jazz Singer, produced by Warner Brothers with the Warner Vitaphone, comes out. And Norman actually anticipated the coming of sound. The problem was that he invested in the wrong sound equipment.
Oh.
So he invested in a device called the camera phone when Warner's Vitaphone became the standard that projectors eventually ended up using. So he managed to get a couple experiments done with the sound, but
one terrible decision.
He picked the laser disc.
Yeah.
That's the perfect analogy right there.
Oh my God. So even at that point in the game, in the early 1920s or the late 1920s, there was an audience for black films.
Absolutely.
Which, when I think of Black films, I think of blaxploitation, and I think of that coming into prominence like in the 60s and 70s especially.
Yeah, so I teach a Black cinema class at UCF, and that's the first thing I like to make a stand for, is that this is the history that goes back to the beginning of the motion picture. If you've seen Jordan Peele's Nope, they highlight the fact that quite literally the
cowboy on film. Yes.
Exactly. So the jockey that was featured in Edward Muybridge's Horses in Motion. So again, images of individuals of color. I mean, this goes all the way back to the birth of cinema right here.
They don't even know who that jockey is.
Nobody does. There's a whole bunch of different names and apocryphal stories. The family that was mentioned in Nope is fictional.
Yeah.
But that's also part of it. It's such a important component of our entire story of American film, and only portions and fragments of it are being rediscovered right now. That's why I love early film.
I want to just come and sit in on your class.
Oh, yeah, please do. It'd be great.
She will. Be careful. She will. No, it is fascinating. I feel like we could dig into this for quite a while, but I just want to get to why. So you kind of mentioned back in the day there was a mayoral race and they kind of demonized the people coming in making films. What can we do now to try to bring them back? Or is it too late? Are we out of the game?
So I don't think it's too late. It's never too late. And if anything, what's interesting is that Florida tends to get in the spotlight in moments of very decisive change within the film industry. For example, in the 1930s, when sound stages were being built around Los Angeles, there was a governor in Florida who was actively pursuing the motion picture industry. And he even created a committee for the development of the motion picture and nearly ended up getting a bunch of sound stages built in the Tampa Bay area. Around the 1950s, when we start seeing location filmmaking, once again, this is where we get films like The Creature from the Black Lagoon, The Yearling. In the 70s and 80s, this is where Florida actually was the third most sought after film location outside of New York and California. And when I first started getting involved in the local film industry in the 2000s and 2010s, it was a very vibrant hub, especially down in South Florida. What's happening right now, I think, is very exciting at the county and local level. We've not seen a lot of support from the state legislator. As of almost 10 years now, there have been an effort to pass tax incentive bills and legislations to make it far more financially inducive for productions to come to the state. But we're facing competition with New Orleans. We're facing competition with Atlanta, Wilmington, all these other Sunbelt states that can offer very similar environments with a much greater set of financial benefits. So I believe a week or two ago, we had a meeting at the Orange County Commissioner's office, and there's a plan now to begin a local tax incentive bill. Several other counties are beginning a very similar type of policy. And this goes back to the 1970s with organizations like the Florida Motion Picture and Television Alliance, and organizations like this that wanted to coordinate with county offices and city offices. And this is something that made Florida as a state very different than, say, New York or California, where the industry is still basically in New York based around New York City, or in California around Los Angeles. Florida has always been decentralized. Yeah. And that's a good thing. That's a strength, because you have so much different landscapes, so many different dynamics at play that you can begin to showcase here. We don't need to have just a Hollywood East in Orlando or Hollywood East in Miami.
Spread it around.
Yeah. And we're all in it together.
And we're not even competing with just other states in the Southeast. And in some cases, we're competing with other countries.
Absolutely. You mentioned before Roadhouse, set in Florida, a Florida story shot in the Dominican Republic.
Why?
Oh, what the hell, man?
Why?
And they tricked me too. I thought that was in the Keys. I was like, oh, that's nice, in the Keys. And I looked it up.
Yeah.
Got me.
Oh my gosh. This has been fascinating. My last question for you.
Okay.
Of the 10 movies, we're going to put the 10 that you recommended to us, that you recommend, we know about. Tell us why we should all watch Creature from the Black Lagoon.
Oh my.
It's a masterpiece.
It is.
It really is. So I had a chance to meet Ginger Staley, who was the stand-in for Julia Adams, who was the woman who was kidnapped by the creature. And just even hearing those backstories of what it took to shoot those sequences, it holds up. I teach a film history course also at UCF, and when we got to our Universal Horror section, the students just groaned. A black and white movie, they thought it was going to be very kitschy and all that, but it captures this great ambiance, environment. The underwater photography, it holds up even
Can't even
today.
imagine back then, the equipment they would have had and what they could do with what we have now.
Absolutely. And so many different of those inventions and refinements were done right here in Florida at Wakulla, Silver Springs, and by local Florida film boosters. So it's a must-see. It really is.
I'm just ever going to picture that dude climbing out of the water with those poor unsuspecting spring goers there. Thank you so much for all these great stories.
Oh, my
Hey,
gosh.
by the way, fascinating character here. And you're writing a book, or you've already written the book?
Yes.
Couple.
It's coming out in July, right?
Yes. So I have a book called Motion Picture Paradise, and it is the entire history of film production in Florida. So it goes all the way back to those gonzo cameramen in 1898 who were shooting about the Spanish-American War. And it actually goes all the way up to the COVID-19 pandemic when the Ocala Drive-In was the last place where first-run movies were shown in America during the pandemic.
In America?
In America.
I didn't know that either.
My goodness. Please, we're going to have you back. I'm going to talk to
please.
you for some Black history stuff.
I would love
Because,
to.
oh my gosh,
We
you're
learned
just
a lot
incredible. Yeah, this is you could teach a master class, and I'm sure you have. You do it every time.
Sure, you do.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much.
Thank
for
you.
being here today.